In this video, I'm going to show you how to authenticate your users using their email and password with Firebase. So this is the screen we're going to build now. And right now we just have the empty app we created in the last video. So before we do any actual coding on trying to log our users in with email, we need to go to the Firebase Console and to the Firebase project we created in the last video. And let's go, actually I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And we're going to go to the Authentication tab. And first we need to set up authentication. You need to do this for every new Firebase project you create. So let's say get started. And here we are given multiple options on, actually many options on authentication. So for now, we're just going to enable email password authentication. And later we're going to also add Facebook and Google and that type of stuff. But since now we're doing email password, we're just going to enable email password and say save. And that's all we need to do in the Firebase console for now. Actually, we need to do one more thing. Since we're not going to build a registration page yet, we're going to have to add a user manually. So go to this users tab in your authentication part and say add user. I'm going to put in a random email, let's say boris@programmingaddict.com, and let's set a password of 123456. Okay, now let's say add user. And that's it. We have our created date and time and our user ID. So now we can use this email and the 123456 password for logging in. Okay, now we're in Android Studio and it's time to create our UI. So in the lib folder, that's where all your Flutter code will be. I'm going to add a new folder and I'm going to call it login. And in this folder, we're going to have a couple of pages for logging in. For example, for our email login, for our Google and Firebase login, or for Facebook login and that type of stuff. So now I'm just going to create a empty Dart file called email login. And now let's create a stateful widget, which we're going to call email login. So in Android Studio and in Visual Studio Code, I believe, there is a nice snippet of code that basically generates a stateful widget for you. So if you say stful in Android Studio and just press tab, it will generate all of this boilerplate code for you, and you just have to type in the name of your widget. So that can be nice for increasing productivity. So let's say email login and say enter. Okay, now we're getting a bunch of errors, and that's basically because we didn't import any modules. So I'm going to put my cursor on whatever the error is. For example, I can put it over stateful widget or over a key or build context, whatever it is, and press Alt Enter. And it will give me three options to import Cupertino, which are the iOS styled widgets, Material, which are the Android material type of widgets, and widgets, which I believe is just a general package for widgets. So since we're going to use material design, because we don't need to go too crazy about the design because this course is primarily focused on Firebase, I'm just going to import material. And that's it, all our errors resolved. So now we need a scaffold. And if you're a beginner and you don't know what a scaffold is, that's basically a container for all of your pages that gives it nice styling and all that type of stuff. And now in there, since we're going to have elements stacked on top of each other, we're going to have them in a column like here, restaurants, then login, then email, then password. We need to have that in a column. So here we're going to say body, column, and that column will have children. And there we can just put some text saying login. Okay, before we go any further, we probably want to see our changes in our Flutter application live as we're working on the UI. So we first need to run the app, but before we do that, we need to make sure that Flutter will open this route, this widget. So we are going to go to main.dart, and it's here says home in the material app. It says, okay, home, and then that's this widget. We're just going to switch out home for email login. And that will immediately open up the login page. So if you didn't see what I did there, because Android Studio does a lot of stuff for me, I first had an error on email login, and if I press Control Space and press Enter, Android Studio will automatically import it for me, or I can press Alt Enter and say Import Library. So there are a couple of options around this. So you need to import your stuff, but if you use stuff like Android Studio, it will do a lot of that for you. So I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to run the app. Okay, as you see now, the app is up and running, but our login text is all the way up here. So let's try to fix it. Let's first put this column, say that its main axis alignment is in center, which will basically vertically center this text. So let's say save, and yeah, login is now vertically centered. And in order to horizontally center everything, I'm going to wrap the column widget in center. So Alt Enter on column, wrap with center, save and reload, and boom, we have it in center. But now we need to actually make this into some text that's going to be big and look like a title. We can do that pretty simply by using the style property and saying text style. And in there we can set the color. And if you want to get, for example, the primary color of your app, which I want to do here, you can just do theme.of, pass in the build context that you have, and say primary color. As simple as that. And let's make it bigger by giving it a font size of 25. And let's make it a bit thicker, not really like bold, but give it a bigger font weight. So let's say font weight dot W600. Let's save this, go back, and that looks good. But in our restaurant reviews app, the primary color is not blue, but it's purple. So let's change it to purple, save and reload. And also, if you do not care about this UI building stuff, if you're a bit more advanced, you can skip ahead in the video. I'll leave the timestamp below where you will actually get to see how Firebase login works. So the next thing we're going to add is login. So this is login, and we should also have a title above it that says restaurants. Restaurants. I'm going to add a little gap between them. Size box, height 5, and I'm putting const in front of this because this doesn't have any dynamic data that can be changed while the app is executing, and this improves performance. I have a different video on this, so I'm going to leave it in the cards so you can check it after you're done with this video. So I'm going to save, go back, and that looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to add another gap over here of 25. And I'm going to add a text field. So the first text field is for email, and the second one is going to be for passwords. So text field, and in there, let's see what we're going to do. Let's first put some nice styling on it by putting a decoration on, saying input decoration. And in there we can say, I believe, label text. So since this is email, we're going to say email. We need a border, we're going to put that, outline border, actually outline input border, and that should be it. One more thing we need for this email is a controller. So every text field that you're going to work with needs a controller, so you can maybe dynamically change the value or access it later. So let's say controller, and I'm going to call this email controller. And now we need to declare it up here. So let's say final email controller equals text editing controller. And yeah, that's okay. And now let me save and reload this. And yeah, that looks pretty good. We just need to put some padding on this email. So I'm going to say Alt Enter, wrap with padding, and I'm going to say only left 16 and right 16. That should make it look good enough. When we go in, it looks nice. That's pretty nice. One thing we can change about this is having it be of an email keyboard type. Let's set that right now. So let's say keyboard type, text input type dot email. So this basically makes it easier for users to type in the email. So let me save. Focus on the field. Actually, I need to unfocus. Focus again. No, that doesn't work. Let me restart the app. Okay, now I'm going to focus on the field, and as you can see here, I have nice helpers for typing in the email and that type of stuff. So that's basically what that does. Okay, now let's add a text field for password, and I'm just going to copy this widget. Copy all of this, paste it, and change a couple of things. So let's say password, and also let's add another controller for a password. Password controller, copy the whole password controller name, and paste it over here. The only thing we need to add here, actually remove the keyboard type because this is not an email. And since we want it basically to hide what is being typed, just like a password field, we're going to say obscure text true. And now we have this field and it works just like a password field. And I'm going to add a little bit of a gap between them using the size box. Let's have it at 16. And yeah, that's it for that. So the last thing I need to add here is a button. So let's just put here below this, let's put an elevated button. It needs to have non-pressed event, and it needs to have a child. So the child is going to be text. It's going to say login. And also they should have a little bit of a gap between them, which would be, actually, let's see, let me save this, go back into the app, and yeah, this login button is kind of small. So the way we're going to make it stretch across the screen, I'm going to wrap it with a sized box, just like the one we're using for padding, and I'm going to set the width to be infinity. That has it to stretch across the screen. Now we'll just add some padding for it to align with the text fields. So let's say 16. And to me, that looks good enough. Okay, now that we have the foundation build, we can start implementing the whole Firebase thing. So we can use this onPressed event over here, and I'm just going to build a new method called login, so I don't embed all of this code in the widget tree. So I'm going to make this method up here, say login, open close parentheses, and a new function. So now it should be pretty simple to work with this. So the way you log in a Firebase user with login and password is by using the sign in with email and password method on the Firebase Authentication instance. So let me show you how that works. So let's say Firebase auth.instance. That's okay. And we have the instance we need. So now we can say sign in with email and password. And it immediately gives us the option to type in the email and the password. And that's what we're going to be using these controllers for. So we're going to be using the email controller over here, saying email.text. And also for the password, saying password.text, password controller.text. And this is great. If this works out, if the email and password are correct, our user is going to be logged in. And if not, they're not going to be logged in, but nothing will happen regardless on the UI side. So now let's try to make that work. So first, this function returns a future. And if you're not familiar with futures, you need to check my video out on futures where I explain why they're there and how they work, because this is not going to make sense to you. So I'm going to make this function async, and I'm going to await the sign in with email and password. And then once this is done, I'm just going to redirect the user to the home page. So let's say navigator.of push. Yeah, we just need push material page route. Is going to take in a builder, and that builder is going to return the home page we have, I believe, in main.dart. Really, who cares? Yeah, this is this home page, whatever. We just need it to take us somewhere just so we know that we are logged in. But what happens if this fails? What happens if signing in with email and password fails? How do we know that the user is not logged in and they need to try again? Well, let's go into the definition of the sign in with email and password method. And here it's very well documented on what happens in certain circumstances. So let's read this documentation. It says here, attempts to sign in a user with an email and password And if successful, it also signs the user into the app and updates any auth state changes, ID token changes, or user changes stream listener. So if we were using these event handlers, this will be relevant to us, but right now we're not. But what happens if something is not okay? Here it says a Firebase auth exception is thrown. And it also gives error codes to say what happens when. So now we know what happens if a user entered, for example, a wrong email and the password, or if something went wrong. This exception is thrown. And we can try to now handle this exception and basically fail gracefully and tell our users what's going on. So now we need to wrap this in a try-catch block. So let's say try, and now we have a catch block. And now we can try to go in and handle the errors. So one thing we can just do here is maybe be lazy and show some dialogue that says, oh, something failed, something went wrong, and that's it. But we can also try to be more specific based on these codes that we're getting over here. Because here we have the invalid email, user disabled, user not found, wrong password. So there are multiple things that can go wrong, and we should probably give our users at least somewhat of an indication on what they did wrong. So we can do that pretty easily by checking the code that we get in the exception. And just right now we have one problem. Currently we're catching all of the possible exceptions. So it will not just catch an exception from Firebase if something goes wrong here. For example, if something goes wrong with the navigation here, it will also be caught here. And in some cases, that's maybe what you want to do. But most of the time, you should not be catching all of the exceptions. You should be catching the exceptions that you want to catch and you know what you're going to do with them. So for example, if I had this null value here, let's say, or actually if I just threw an error, some random error, this would throw an exception and it would be handled here, even though it has nothing to do with Firebase. So the way we can pinpoint a specific exception, we can say here before catch, we can say on Firebase auth exception, catch, and then declare the exception. So now if something goes wrong with the navigation, it's not going to be caught here. The most important thing here is now we can check the code, because we can access the code and we can check if it's email, invalid email, if it's something else. Because if we did it like this, we wouldn't get the code because this is a general exception. So then we would have to try and convert the type into a Firebase auth exception and so on and so forth. So this is probably best practice. Just catch the exceptions you actually want to catch. Don't try to catch them all. Okay, and now we can try to display something to our users based on whatever the error is that we got. So if we go back to this definition, and by the way you go to a definition of a method, in Android Studio at least, is you press Control and you click on that method. Or you just click on the method and press Control B. In Visual Studio Code, it's F12. So now we have multiple different codes. So it's invalid email, disabled, not found, wrong password. We're going to handle all of these and display different messages. So I'm actually going to make a switch statement where I'm going to handle each and every one of these. So let's say E for exception, and let's just copy all of these. So I'm going to copy them like this. And I'm going to make a case for all of these, put them in a string, colon, break. So now we have a switch case structure. Actually, I need to change this to e.code. But now we have a switch case structure where we can handle this based on whatever we need. So I'm just going to declare a variable here that says message, which is going to be a message we're going to display to the user. So now I'm going to initialize this message in different cases in the switch statement. So for an invalid email, I'm going to say the email you entered was invalid, for example. And for user disabled, we can say the user you tried to log into is disabled. Or user not, which is user not found, which I missed over here. So user not found, The user you tried to log into was not found. And we have the last message, which is or actually I just say incorrect password. And now we have a valid message for whatever happens in Firebase. And we can display this to our users, and our users can know exactly what's going on. So now I'm just going to show a dialog that's going to say login failed, and with whatever it is the message is over here. So let's say show dialog. We're giving it the current build context. We're giving it the builder, which is just a function that takes in a context and returns a widget. And we're going to return an alert dialog, which is a material widget. In the title, we're going to say login failed. And in the content, we're going to say message. So that's going to be this message we initialized over here. And now I'm just going to add a simple OK button that's going to close the dialog. So let's say actions, text button, which is on pressed, a text widget which says OK. And this on pressed is just going to close the pop-up, the dialog, by using the navigator context pop. And that should be it. So now we can try to log in and see what happens when it fails. So we're going to just input some random data and see what happens. So let's go back to the app, and I'm going to put in some random email at programmingaddict.com, log in, and nothing happened. So I'm not sure what's going on, honestly. So we'll have to explore this together. I'm going to put a breakpoint here, a debugger breakpoint, and I'm going to press login again. And it does hit here, and I'm going to put a breakpoint here on the exception, just to see what's going on. And I'm going to continue the execution of the program. And nothing happens. So since it doesn't land on this catch exception, or it doesn't land here, the only thing I can imagine that's happening is that something else crashes for some reason. So I'm going to go into the... let's go and see the logs. Yeah, so here is the console. And what does it say? No Firebase app default has been created. Call Firebase initialize app. Oh, okay. Yeah, because we were doing that in the home page. Okay, I see. And we need to initialize it here in the material app. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to wrap the whole app in a future builder. So wrap with, it doesn't give me an option for a future builder, but I'm going to use stream builder and then make it into a future builder. So let's say future builder. I can remove this object thing, and I'm going to use a variable that I'm going to call initialization, which is just going to be a future. And this initialization future, I'm going to make here and just make it Firebase.initialize app, and it's going to be the default app. So since this is a future, I'm going to declare it as a final variable in the app and then use it over here. I could use it like this, but on every hot reload, the app would be completely restarted because this would get called again and it would rebuild the entire widget tree, which is something we don't really want. One more thing I forgot to add here is a loading indicator in case this is not yet done initializing, in case Firebase is not done initializing, because it does take a second to happen. So I'm going to say debug. Okay, and when I try to do this, everything just crashes. And that's because I did not add this one line of code to main.dart to the main function, which is widgets flutter binding ensure initialized. Okay, now the app is up and running successfully, so we can try to log in once again. So let's use test at random whatever.com. Use the whatever password and try to log in. And now I'm going to remove these debuggers and let it go. And yeah, it says the user you tried to log into was not found. So now let's try to log into a user that actually exists, but use the wrong password. So let's remove that. Select all. Boris at programming.com. Log in. Incorrect password. That's great. So as you can see, all of this works and it's great. The only thing that's missing from this page right now, actually, let me try to log in successfully. So it's this email and it's this password, log in, and it takes me to this blank homepage we have. So I'm going to restart the app so I can go back. So yeah, the only thing missing here is, for example, I can try to log in multiple times, which sucks, especially if you have a slow network connection, and if you tap on this constantly, you will trigger multiple requests at once. So for example, what we can do is we can hide the login button and display some sort of loading here. And that's why I made this widget stateful. So we're going to say, okay, bool is logging in. And based on this, we're going to know if we're going to display the button or the loading indicator. So here in the login function, I'm going to say set state is logging in to true. And after it's done, so after the try and after the catch block, I'm going to add a finally block, which just executes whether or not basically our try body succeeds or fails. So after try or after catch finally gets executed. So we can paste this in, say is logging in equals to false. And now we can go down the widget tree and say, okay, log in. So if is not logging in, then we can display this button. Otherwise, we're not going to display it. And if is logging in, we're going to display a centered circular progress indicator. I believe that's what it's called, which is basically just a loading spinner. So I'm going to save this now and restart the app just in case. And now I'm going to try to log in with some email and some password. And as you can see, it immediately just shows the loading and you cannot press on it multiple times, which is great. The only thing that's missing here maybe is some padding, which we can put a sized box here with a height of 16, and that should make it work. Yeah, now this looks great. So that's pretty much it for this video on logging in with email. We saw how to basically build a little UI, how to try to log in with Firebase, and how to handle these errors. It's very important that you handle your errors correctly, because especially in these types of cases, maybe you want your users to know what's going on with whatever they're trying to do. So in the next two videos, I'm going to show you two alternative authentication methods, which are Facebook and Google. As you see here, Firebase has options for many different providers, and it doesn't make any sense to cover all of them, but it makes sense to cover the major ones, which are being Facebook, Google, and of course email password. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'll see you in the next video.